The sky above the battlefield was black with smoke. The ground was broken and covered with craters. Metal from destroyed machines was still hot. And the smell of burned fuel mixed with the sharp scent of blood. Zaira stepped out of her silver inspection pod, her boots sinking into the muddy ground. She had come from the Galactic Council with one mission: study humans during war and decide if they were too dangerous to be part of the galaxy. She had read the reports. Humans were described as cold during battle, showing no sadness even when surrounded by death. To her people, such behavior was unnatural, almost monstrous. Now she was here to see it with her own eyes. She activated her translator and scanned the area. Her 4 eyes moved quickly, searching for movement. In the distance, through the thick smoke, she saw shapes, tall figures in dark armor. Human soldiers. They were not crying, not screaming, not frozen in fear. They were calm. Some sat on overturned crates, eating from metal tins. Others cleaned their rifles or checked damaged drones. A few laughed quietly at some joke. And all of this happened while bodies, both human and alien, lay only a few steps away. To Zaira, it was disturbing. Where were the funeral chants? Where were the signs of grief? In her culture, the death of one warrior would stop the battle for hours. Here, dozens were dead, and the humans behaved as if nothing had happened. She moved closer, keeping low, hiding behind a fallen transport. Her recorder floated beside her, silently filming every detail. She zoomed in on one soldier, a tall man with a scar across his cheek. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, blood soaking the fabric. But instead of seeking help, he simply wrapped a strip of cloth around the wound and kept working on a damaged rifle. Another soldier said something to him, and he laughed, shaking his head. The sound of laughter in this place made Zaira's skin crawl. How could they laugh here? Did they feel nothing? Suddenly, the ground shook. A low whistling sound grew louder in the air, an incoming artillery shell. Zaira's instincts screamed at her to run. She turned, but before she could move far, the explosion hit. The blast threw her forward. Her vision blurring from the shock, her ears rang as debris rained down. When she opened her eyes, she saw the scar-faced human kneeling beside her. "Stay down," he shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind a pile of sandbags. Zaira was frozen. No alien inspector had ever been this close to human combat before. More explosions erupted, shaking the ground again and again. The human soldier didn't panic. His hands moved quickly, checking his weapon, loading new rounds. His face was calm, almost bored. He spoke into a small radio, his voice steady, giving orders to others. Zaira could barely breathe. Her mind screamed, "Why is he not afraid? Why is no one afraid?" She peeked over the sandbags and saw more humans, some firing at distant shapes in the smoke. Others dragging the wounded out of danger. Even the injured didn't cry out. They gritted their teeth and kept moving. A soldier, with blood on his chest, still managed to throw extra ammunition to a teammate before collapsing. Zaira didn't understand. This was not the chaos she expected. It was something else, something colder, more controlled. When the attack slowed, the human turned to her. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, scanning her alien armor with suspicion. Zaira's mind raced. She couldn't reveal she was an inspector. It would change how they behaved. I was just passing through," she said quickly, her translator turning her words into smooth English. "Wrong place to take a walk," he said, almost smirking, before she could reply. A sharp crack sounded nearby, another sniper shot. The human instantly pushed her down. Shielding her with his own body, Zaira felt his weight, his steady heartbeat. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even seem to consider the danger to himself. More shots rang out. But the humans moved like a single machine, covering each other. Returning fire, advancing. It was violent, yes, but also precise. Zyra's recorder kept running, capturing every movement. She knew this footage would shock the Galactic Council. Here was proof of what they feared: humans who could kill without breaking. Humans who treated war like routine work. But as she watched the scar-faced soldier help a wounded comrade to safety, she felt something she didn't expect: confusion. If they were heartless, why risk their lives for each other? If they were emotionless, why did they protect strangers, even her? Her people had told her humans were dangerous because they lacked feelings. Now she wasn't so sure. The soldier looked at her again, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Stick close," he said, "and try not to get killed." Zyra almost laughed. At the absurdity, her mission had just begun, and already nothing was as simple as she had believed. The smoke from the earlier attack still hung heavy in the air. Drifting low over the shattered streets, Zyra followed the scar-faced human through the ruins, her boots crunching on broken glass and shell fragments. He hadn't told her his name yet, but the others called him Harris. Speaking in short bursts over their radios as they moved, she stayed close, not because she trusted him, but because every distant thud or sharp crack of gunfire reminded her that alone she wouldn't last a minute here. The humans seemed to know every sound by heart. A low whistle meant incoming shells. A short metallic ping meant a sniper's bullet hitting metal instead of flesh. None of it made them flinch. They reached a collapsed building where Harris stopped and crouched, scanning the street ahead. His breathing was slow, his eyes focused. Zyra couldn't see what he was looking for. She saw only shadows and dust. Then the street erupted in flashes as enemy drones swooped down from the smoke, firing streams of plasma into the rubble. The blast lit up Harris's face for a second, but there was no fear, only quick calculation. He barked orders into his radio, and two other humans appeared from cover, weapons already aimed. Zyra ducked as return fire filled the air, the sound hammering her ears. She wanted to run. Every muscle in her alien body told her to run, but Harris didn't move from his position, calmly reloading his rifle, as if this was training, not a battle. She crawled closer, shouting over the noise, "How can you be so calm?" He didn't look at her, just pulled the trigger and said, "We can't afford not to be." The words hit her harder than the explosions. Her people mourn before the fight even ends. Here, these humans locked away their feelings like they didn't exist. It made no sense. One of the drones exploded in midair, its metal raining down in smoking pieces. Another dove low, forcing Harris to shove Zyra aside before blasting it apart at close range. She realized then that he was not only fighting, he was constantly watching her position, making sure she stayed alive. When the street finally fell silent, except for the hiss of burning metal, Harris stood and waved his soldiers forward. They didn't celebrate, didn't even pause. They just moved. Checking weapons and scanning for the next threat, Zyra's recorder floated behind her, still documenting every moment. The footage would confirm everything the Council feared: humans killing with no hesitation. But now she was seeing cracks. In that cold mask, when Harris passed a fallen comrade, he slowed for just a second, eyes lingering before he stepped over the body. It was barely a pause, but it was there. That small flicker unsettled her more than his calmness. They reached an abandoned shop, its windows shattered. Inside, humans had set up a small forward post. Two medics worked over an injured soldier, while others checked maps and drone feeds. Harris dropped his pack, leaned his rifle against the wall, without a word, began patching the cloth on his shoulder where his wound had bled through. Zyra watched him, trying to read his face. She expected pain, frustration, maybe even fear. Instead, there was only focus. "You should rest," she said quietly, unsure why she cared. He glanced at her, and for the first time, his expression softened, just for a heartbeat. Later, he said, "We finish this first, before she could respond. A distant explosion shook the floor under their feet, followed by the sharp rattle of gunfire. Someone shouted that an enemy strike team was approaching fast. Harris grabbed his weapon and looked at her. "You stay here," he ordered, but she didn't. She followed him out into the street again, her recorder hovering at her side. And as the chaos returned in a storm of sound and fire, Zaira realized she wasn't just observing any more, she was in it. Every instinct told her to flee, but something about the way Harris moved, the way all of them fought, pulled her forward. They weren't just surviving, they were holding the line, and she needed to understand why, even if it killed her. The night was colder than Zaira expected for this planet, the kind of cold that crept under armor and clung to skin. The small camp was lit by weak yellow lamps strung between broken walls, their light barely reaching the shadows beyond humans. Moved quietly, checking equipment, eating quick meals, cleaning weapons with the same care someone else might give to a ceremonial object. Zaira sat near a half-collapsed wall, her recorder floating at her side, sending bursts of encrypted footage to the Galactic Council. Her latest report was blunt humans displayed dangerous emotional detachment in the presence of extreme violence. By her people's standards, they were unstable, even inhuman. She told herself she was only recording facts, but each time she replayed the moments from earlier, her eyes lingered on Harris. He was across the camp now, crouched by a portable heater, his scar catching the light as he worked on repairing a rifle that had been bent during the last fight. He wasn't laughing this time. His face was unreadable, his movements slow and precise. When another soldier dropped beside him and offered a ration bar, took it with a small nod, saying nothing. Zaira's translator struggled with the silence. It could not read emotions that weren't spoken aloud. She wanted to ask him questions, to push until he broke that calm mask. But she also feared the answers. A sudden scream cut through the night, sharp and short before turning into a low moan. Zaira turned to see a medic working on a young human whose leg had been torn open by shrapnel earlier that day. The soldier's face was pale, but his jaw was locked tight. No tears, no panic. The medic whispered something and kept working. Zaira couldn't stop staring. Where she came from, the injured would be surrounded by family, their pain shared by all. Here, the hurt was carried alone. It was like watching a different species entirely, one that had learned to hide its soul when danger was near. She shifted her gaze back to Harris, catching the faintest change in him as the injured man was moved away. His hands paused for half a breath. His eyes followed the stretcher, and then, just like that, he was back to work. It was so fast she almost thought she imagined it. Her recorder caught it, though, every tiny flicker of emotion buried beneath control. That recording would confuse the council, and maybe that's why she didn't delete it. Later, when most of the camp was quiet, Harris came to her, his boots crunching softly on the frost. "You're not just passing through," he said, without preamble. His voice was low, steady, but there was weight behind it. Zaira kept her eyes on the ground, unsure whether to lie or confess. He studied her for a moment before adding, "Doesn't matter why you're here, but you've seen enough to know this place isn't safe." She wanted to tell him she'd seen more than enough, that she had enough to have humanity banned from the galaxy, but the words stuck in her throat. Because as he spoke, there was no threat in his tone, only concern. Before she could reply, a burst of static came over his radio, followed by a tense voice. "Enemy patrol. Closing fast." Harris straightened immediately, the calm falling over him like armor. He handed her a small sidearm, its grip warm. From his hand, "Stay close, don't freeze, and whatever you do, don't hesitate." Zaire took it, her fingers trembling. She had never fired a weapon in her life. Her people relied on shields, barriers, and distance. But here, in the shadow of ruined buildings, she felt the raw weight of survival pressing down on her. The humans moved with quiet efficiency, forming a loose perimeter around the camp. No shouting, no frantic movements. It was almost like they were preparing for a simple chore, not a fight, and Zaya realized with a shiver that maybe for them it was C. She followed Harris into the darkness, the sound of her own heartbeat loud in her ears. Ahead, in the faint glow of the lamps, the shadows began to shift. If her report to the council had been written only an hour earlier, she would have called these people unfeeling machines. Now, watching Harris steady his rifle, his eyes narrowing as the enemy closed in, she wasn't sure what they were anymore. The question gnawed at her as the first shot cracked through the night, and the humans surged forward without a word. She kept moving with them, not as an observer now, but as part of their line, and for the first time since she landed on this planet, Zaire didn't know if she was here to study them or to survive with them. The darkness pressed down like a weight, thick with smoke and the sour scent of burned metal. Zaire crouched in a narrow trench beside Harris, the damp soil cold against her hands, somewhere beyond the lip of the trench. The night roared with the distant rumble of moving armor and the faint electric whine of enemy drones. The humans around her spoke in low murmurs, checking weapons and adjusting gear. Every movement deliberate and quiet. She could feel their focus, the sharp, unshakable readiness that seemed to hang over them like a shield. A thin rain began to fall, making the mud cling to her boots. It pattered on Harris's helmet, dripping down the scar on his cheek. He didn't look at her, but she felt his awareness. He seemed to notice every sound, the snap of a rifle bolt, the faint hum of the power cells in their rifles, the muffled groan of a soldier stretching cramped muscles. Zaya's own senses strained to match his, but all she felt was her pulse pounding in her ears. Then the night split open. An enemy artillery strike slammed into the far side of the trench, sending dirt and shards of metal raining down. The shockwave knocked her onto her back, her vision spinning. Harris was already moving, pulling her up and shoving her toward the cover of a reinforced section. "Stay low," he said, voice steady despite the chaos overhead. The humans didn't scream or scatter. They slid into firing positions like pieces in a machine, their rifles spitting light into the darkness. Zaira risked a glance over the trench wall and saw them dark shapes moving fast between the wreckage. Eyes glowing faintly in the rain, the enemy soldiers advanced without hesitation. But the humans met them with a brutal precision that made her shiver. They didn't shout battle cries or curse their foes. They fired, moved, reloaded, fired again. The air filled with the smell of scorched metal and the sharp tang of ozone. A body tumbled into the trench beside her, a young human no older than 20. His armor scorched and cracked. Another soldier dragged him to the side without breaking formation, covering him with a tarp before stepping back to the firing line. Zaira stared, her throat tight. They didn't stop, not even for him. She wanted to yell at them, to ask how they could just keep going. But then she saw Harris's jaw clench. His shoulders tightened for just a second before he snapped his rifle up and dropped another, advancing. Shape, it was there just for an instant, the weight of the loss before he forced it down. The enemy pressed harder, the air trembling with the force of their push. A drone swooped low over the trench, spraying plasma, and Harris tackled her into the mud, shielding her until another soldier took it down with a clean shot. He rolled off her, breathing hard, but still in control. "Move with me," he ordered. She followed, slipping in the mud, nearly dropping the sidearm he'd given her. Around them, humans fought shoulder to shoulder. The only sounds the crack of rifles and the hiss of rain on hot metal. An explosion tore a hole in the trench wall ahead, flinging dirt and shrapnel into the air. Through the gap, Zaira saw enemy shapes closing in fast. Before she could speak, Harris was already there, stepping into the breach, firing in short, controlled bursts until the last shape dropped. The gap in the wall smoked and steamed in the rain. For a moment, the world went quiet except for the soft hiss of falling water. Zara's chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her breathing. She looked at Harris, mud streaked across his face, water dripping from his helmet, his eyes sharp but distant. It was the same look she'd seen all too calm, contained, untouchable. But now she thought she saw something else hidden under it. Not the absence of emotion, but the cost of holding it back. She didn't say anything, and neither did he. The humans were already checking weapons, replacing ammo, preparing for the next wave. As if what just happened was nothing more than another step in a long march, Zaira realized she was starting to move like them without thinking, without questioning, because if she didn't, she might not live to see morning. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy with the smell of wet earth and burned metal. Dawn was a faint gray smear on the horizon, barely touching the jagged ruins that surrounded them. Zaira walked a few paces behind Harris and his unit as they moved down a cracked roadway littered with shell casings. The city felt hollow, its silence broken only by the crunch of boots and the occasional rattle of loose metal in the wind. Somewhere far off, a single gunshot echoed and faded. Swallowed by the emptiness, they were on a supply run. Harris had told her, though she could tell it was more than that. The humans carried extra ammunition and heavier rifles than she'd seen in the camp. They moved with the kind of watchfulness that meant trouble was expected. Zaira's recorder floated beside her, quietly tracking every sound, every face, every motion. The council would see this as more evidence-armed humans moving through a ghost city without fear. But she was starting to notice the smaller things, the way Harris glanced over his shoulder every few minutes to make sure she was keeping up, the way two soldiers traded quiet, almost joking comments, not to laugh, but to keep the tension from eating them alive. They turned a corner, and the world erupted. Gunfire poured down from the shattered windows above, bright flashes cutting through the gray morning. Zara dropped to the ground, instinct making her curl against the curb. Harris didn't drop. He moved, fast and low, dragging her behind a burned-out vehicle before firing back. More humans took cover, returning fire with sharp, controlled bursts. No panic, no wasted shots. The precision of it was chilling, like watching gears in a machine turn perfectly under pressure. A soldier went down beside them, a spray of blood on the vehicle's blackened paint. Zaira's breath caught before she could react. Another soldier pulled the fallen man to cover, not stopping to check if he was alive. Harris shouted an order, and two humans broke away, moving through the wreckage to flank the attackers. The firefight was brutal, and quick explosions in the upper floors, the gunfire above going silent one weapon at a time. When it was over, the street smelled of smoke and something metallic that clung to the back of Zaira's throat. She stood slowly, her knees weak. The humans didn't celebrate their survival. They moved through the wreckage, checking for more threats, collecting ammunition from the dead. And then she saw it tucked behind a broken wall, barely visible. Under a collapsed beam, a small alien child, no older than 6 cycles. Its skin was pale blue, its eyes wide with terror. The child belonged to the enemy species. Zaire froze, waiting for what she thought would happen next, but Harris didn't raise his weapon. He knelt, speaking in a low, gentle tone she had never heard from him before. He reached out slowly, offering the child a piece of ration bread. The child hesitated, then took it. Clutching it to its chest, Zara's throat tightened. Everything she had been taught about humans said this should not be possible. This moment of kindness in the middle of such violence, her recorder hovered, capturing the scene. But she didn't know anymore if it was for the council or for herself. Harris lifted the child, settling it against his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "Not our fight," he said quietly, as if explaining it to her. Then he started walking again, the rest of the unit falling in without a word. They didn't question it, didn't treat it as strange. They simply accepted it. Sierra followed. Her mind tangled in questions she had no answers for. Her earlier reports felt incomplete now, as if they were written by someone who had seen only half the truth. She had come here expecting to witness monsters in human skin instead. She was starting to see something far more dangerous: warriors who could be both ruthless and merciful in the same breath. And she didn't know if the galaxy was ready for that. The camp was quiet when they returned, though the quiet felt fragile. Like a thin sheet of glass that could shatter with one wrong sound, the gray light of day had given way to a dull orange dusk. The sky smeared with the smoke of distant fires. Zaire sat alone on a crate near the edge of the encampment. The alien child Harris had rescued, now wrapped in a human field blanket and sleeping a few meters away. Her recorder hovered at her shoulder, its lens focused on Harris as he cleaned his rifle by the glow of a dim lamp. Every movement was methodical, almost ritualistic, as if he could scrub away the day's blood and noise with enough care. She had watched him for hours. Through ambushes, rescues, and moments of eerie stillness, every time she thought she understood. He did something that shattered her theory. The contradiction burned in her mind. How could someone fight like a machine in one moment, then cradle an enemy child the next? Her people had no such balance. They mourned openly, hesitated often, and when they fought with all emotion exposed. Humans, she was learning, hid theirs so deep it almost looked like they didn't have any at all. Finally, she stood and walked toward him, her boots crunching softly in the dirt. "You don't make sense," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Harris didn't look up from the weapon in his hands. "Good," he said simply. "I'm not joking." She pressed. "I've been here long enough to know you should be broken by now. All of you should be." He glanced at her then, one eyebrow slightly raised. And what good would that do? Zaira felt her frustration spike. "It would make you honest," she said. "It would make you normal." Harris set the rifle aside and leaned back against the wall of the tent, his eyes catching the fading light. "You want honesty?" he asked quietly. "Here it is. We let ourselves feel everything in the moment. We don't last. An hour out there," he nodded toward the ruins beyond the camp. "You think we don't see it? The faces? The blood? We see it all, every second, and it stays with us." He tapped the side of his head. "It doesn't go away, not ever. We just lock it up until it's safe to open the door." She frowned. "Safe? When is it ever safe?" Harris's gaze shifted briefly toward the child asleep under the blanket. "Sometimes never," he admitted, his voice almost too low to hear. "That's why you think we have no emotion," he continued, "because you don't see it when it's locked away. You see us holding the line, not falling apart." Zaire felt something strange, then not fear, but a deep, heavy understanding settling in her chest. If what he said was true, humans didn't lack emotion at all. They carried it like a hidden wound, one they could not show until it was too late for anyone to use it against them. Harris leaned forward, picking up the rifle again, his tone matter-of-fact. "The day you see one of us let go in the middle of a fight, that's the day we lose." Zaire stood there, unsure what to say. Her mission had been to record cold, unfeeling creatures that the Council could label a danger to the galaxy. But the truth was far more complicated, and far harder to explain to people who had never stood in a trench or walked through the aftermath of an ambush. As the last of the daylight faded, she turned away, the child's soft breathing mixing with the low clink of Harris reassembling his weapon. For the first time, she wasn't sure which report she was going to send home, because she was no longer certain which side of humanity was the more dangerous one, the part that could kill without hesitation, or the part that could care despite it. The night before the assault was too still, the kind of silence that felt like the world was holding its breath. Zaira sat near the edge of the forward trench, her eyes fixed on the faint glimmer of enemy positions in the distance. Harris was beside her, checking his gear one last time, his movements slower than usual, almost deliberate. No one in the camp was laughing tonight. There were no quiet jokes to cut the tension, only the muted sounds of final preparations and the far-off hiss of wind moving through broken structures. The attack came at dawn, sudden and overwhelming. The sky lit up with streaks of plasma and the pounding thunder of heavy artillery. Zaira was swept along in the chaos, Harris pulling her from one shattered wall to the next as enemy forces poured forward. The ground shook with every detonation, and the air burned with the acrid scent of scorched metal and flesh. She had seen battles since arriving, but this was different. This was the kind of fight where even the humans' calm faces began to tighten at the edges. They were cut off from the main unit when an artillery strike collapsed part of the street. Zaira found herself in a half-demolished building with Harris and 2 other soldiers. All of them crouched low as enemy shapes closed in from every side. One soldier was hit almost instantly, his armor sizzling as he fell. The other took position at the doorway, buying them seconds with short, sharp bursts of fire. Harris didn't hesitate. He grabbed Zaira's arm and pushed her toward a narrow gap in the wall. "You can still get out," he said, his voice rough but steady. She shook her head without thinking. "Not without you." The enemy breached the doorway. A blur of movement and light. Harris was in front of her in an instant, his rifle dropping. 2 before a third slammed into him, the blow knocking them both to the ground. She heard the grunt of pain before she saw the blood spreading across his armor. He still tried to stand, firing until the magazine clicked empty. Zaira's hands moved before her mind caught up, pulling him back, dragging him behind a broken pillar as plasma bolts hissed past. The battle around them roared on. Harris's breathing was shallow, each inhale a ragged pull. He tried to push her away, even now, his voice weak but unyielding. "Get the child out." "And go," she realized, then he wasn't talking about himself. Her gaze flicked to the small figure huddled in the corner. The alien child he had saved days ago, eyes wide and shimmering with terror. Zaira's throat tightened. This was the moment the council had warned her about, a wounded human surrounded by violence. Still choosing to protect someone else instead of himself, her recorder was still active, capturing everything. She could send it now. Send proof that humans were unpredictable. That they were dangerous, but the kind of dangerous no council rule could contain. Harris's blood was warm against her hands as she pressed down to stop the flow. His eyes met hers, sharp even through the pain. "Go," he repeated. She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." She made her decision without another thought. She swung his arm over her shoulder, feeling the weight of him drag at her. With the child clinging to her leg, she pushed forward into the chaos. Every few steps, Harris fired from his sidearm, his aim still deadly despite his fading strength. Zaira didn't know how they made it through the collapsing streets, past the shattered barricades and into the reach of friendly lines. But when they finally stumbled into the hands of human medics, she realized her report would never be the same. Later, as Harris was rushed into surgery, she stood outside the tent. The recorder still hovering silently at her side, she could erase the footage, rewrite the mission, and, for the first time, she knew exactly what she wanted to say. Humans were dangerous. Yes. But not because they lacked emotion. They were dangerous because they could bear it, hide it, carry it through hell itself, and still put someone else's life before their own. And that, she thought, was something the galaxy had never truly seen before.